Hey everybody, Blast Cab Badger here. So, today we're going to jump into somebody releasing something very fresh. We like this guy, however this is going to be a very long video. Very long. I mean over an hour long. So unless you have that kind of time, I highly suggest clicking off the video. It's not like the video makes any money anyway. So, that being said, I'm going to say thank you to these people. Thank you to the channel members who actually clicked the join button and are fighting with me to keep the channel around past this next month. And that is channel members Steve Hughes, the Yabik, and Kriegsman, who's the newest member. So, you want to support the channel, you want to keep the channel around, click the join button that's behind the subscribe button underneath every video, or click the link that says join the channel that's in the description box down below. It's only $4 a month. It's basically nothing for anybody. So yeah, y'all ready for this? I think I'm ready for this. It could be, maybe, possibly, and guess who it is? Count Dankula! I probably blew out some eardrums with that one. Okay, so this is Count Dankula, the latest and greatest in his Absolute Mad Lad series, and it's the Great Nordic Biker War. This should be fun. Alright, so I'm ready. Let's jump in.
One of the main things that gets something or someone featured in Absolute Mad Lads is when I hear the story and my first reaction is to say, shut up, there is no way that happened, that has to be exaggerated. And that is exactly what I said when I first heard of this story. And a lot of you at the end of this very long video are probably going to be saying the same thing. A gang war that got so extreme and so out of hand that it's going to make Sons of Anarchy look like a children's TV show. Let's find out what happens when you mix biker gangs with military hardware.
So basically like a mixed mash of MCs, cartel, and some terrorist groups all combined into one. Basically what we're looking forward to here. Okay, let's see what happens.
The Great Nordic Biker War.
Love Count Dankula's intro.
Please leave a like and a comment on this video because it really helps me in the algorithm. But before we get started, this video was brought to you by Skillshare. Skillshare is an easy to use online learning community with hundreds of different classes to discover. A month free trial of Skillshare. You all know that I am going to absolutely butcher the pronunciations of pretty much all of the names in this video. And I just think that it's very important for all of you to know that I don't care. Now, believe it or not, the Great Nordic Biker War wasn't the first biker war that has happened in Scandyland. And before we get into that war, we need to understand how it all started with some general background into biker culture. Biker gangs themselves have been around for decades, most famously within the United States, with several different gangs being created over the years. Although this culture isn't isolated to the US, as all over the world, biker gangs have sprouted up everywhere, from Austria to Australia.
Yeah, there's pretty much... I really can't think of anywhere you're not going to find biker gangs. Or any type of motorcycle club. I can't think of not a single place. You know, there are actually some MCs that are pretty legit. They're pretty legit. And then there are some MCs that are straight up criminal in everything they do. They're completely outside the law. And then there's some who are kind of in between. So yeah, there's like a flavor of MC for basically everybody. There's even like there's even like biker gang extensions to existing gangs. So yeah, like I can't think of a place on the planet where you're not going to find any. I can't really think of, even if it's like a tiny little like outfit of like five individuals. Okay, they're all over the place.
These gangs may have been started either of their own accord or via inspiration from already established clubs, some of which have been around since the early 1900s. As you can imagine, they focus around the use of motorbikes, or in particular, larger bikes like cruisers or choppers. You know, the big ones that always make you think, man, that guy must be really badass because of how loud his bike is. But in all seriousness, you know, like most gang cultures, it can start off with humble beginnings, which is usually a way for people with similar backgrounds or interests to connect with each other. And of course, the common interest with biker gangs is self-explanatory. You know, motorbikes. But this goes a lot deeper, and they usually have a very strong brotherhood mentality, even if they're not related.
Yeah, and this kind of thing was bled over more so from like the military. Um, you know, because there's a lot of prominent like MCs, a bunch of prominent MCs that have like a militaristic culture in them, especially from veterans. So there's that like that brotherhood mentality brought over. Not to say it didn't exist without veterans being in the mix, but the bond of being with somebody through thick and thin, um, basically staring down death together, it really it really creates a kind of connection that you can't really replicate outside the military. Civilians don't have any concept of this. They don't. Much as they say we sympathize and oh we like our people or whatever. Like no. Eh, as soon as the fire starts, most people break and run. You can tell. You could tell like military versus civilian very fast when that kind of stuff goes down. Because most civilians, they want to think that they'll do this or that, and they think they see it on TV. They're like, yeah, totally. But then when shit hits the fan, you can tell immediately. It's just a totally different thing. Completely different um, versus regular people. So, yeah, a good amount of that is like the military, like brotherhood that's created through mutual pain, suffering, and just going through horrific shit together. Really creates a connection you can't replicate anywhere else. Not even husband and wife can replicate that. Sucks to say it, but that's rare even among lovers. So that should tell people how much of a difference it is. But yeah, like essentially a lot of MCs have that kind of mentality or they have something similar to it.
Their relation comes from the club they all belong to. Biker gangs themselves have varying origins, but the most notable origin was World War II veterans looking for something to keep themselves busy after the war, since a lot of them suffered from PTSD and couldn't stand the normal life of a civilian, which led them into the life of being a biker. Compare this to the rise of biker gangs in Japan, where, similar to the United States, returning veterans needed something to keep themselves busy, and of course the Japanese, loving their vehicles, they hunkered down into modifying cars and of course bikes, spawning what is locally called Bosozoku, the same type of biker gang that you see in the movie Akira.
Damn good movie. Akira's a really good movie. A really good movie. If nobody's seen it yet and you're not turned away by things that aren't like live action or whatever, Akira is a really good movie. I highly encourage people to watch it.
But as you can imagine with any gang of frustrated and adrenaline-hungry men, this soon led to criminality. Now, I could spend all day discussing in depth the history of biker gangs and what subcultures it influence, such as greasers and mods, but we will keep it light for today. This video is already going to be long enough. Biker clubs are split into two main segments. The ones that abide by the law and the ones that don't.
And there's some in between, like I said earlier. Kind of in between. I've had my fair share of run-ins. So I know just a little bit. I know a thing or two because I've seen a thing or two.
Simply, they are split between your general run-of-the-mill standard motorbike enthusiasts and the outlaw gangs. These outlaw gangs usually go by the term of 1%ers, which refers to them being the 1% of bikers that don't follow the law and are true outlaws compared to the 99%. This is usually symbolised by a 1% patch worn on their vest, which again also has other patches to signify their club name, rank and even location. This doesn't apply to all of the outlaw biker gangs, but they were allegedly started in the early years of general biker gangs. Basically, you had the rich boys driving fancier bikes and belonging to government-approved clubs, and then you had the poors. This left a divide between the richer and more sophisticated bikers to the less fortunate working class bikers, of which most were veterans. This contributed to the split between the motorbike enthusiasts and the outlaws. Now, obviously, not all biker gangs are criminal. However, most outlaw gangs started getting involved in more malicious activities, with organised crime being at the forefront of their endeavours. It's hard to tell what 1% or biker gangs truly want, whether it's to feel some sort of unity within a family-like community that can offer protection for the local area, or if it's more for the unity within a criminal organisation, offering some simple grunt work to the highest bidder, pimping women, and of course dealing drugs within their protected territory. So, in other words, it's a way to make some money. Now,
Which, it seems like quite a few organizations end up this way. They start out as something else, and then they turn into something totally different. Then again, I mean, when you have such a huge class divide, or classism, or whatever you want to call it, it's inevitable what poor people are going to do to get ahead, right? But at the same time, there's a lot more to it than that I'm aware of, but most people aren't. Let's just keep going.
Now, with all of that in mind, some popular and well-known 1%er gangs include the likes of the Hells Angels, the Bandidos, the Pagans, and the list goes on, since there are plenty of them out there. And what most gangs like to do is expand their power and influence. So this leads us to the spread of these gangs from the United States into mainland Europe. Biker gangs had already settled in places like the UK since the early 60s, with the Blue Angels MC being one of the oldest clubs in Europe, and if you couldn't tell, they're Scottish. Also, a funny story I have about the Blue Angels is I will never forget the look on my friend's face when he met his girlfriend's dad for the first time and realised he was in the Blue Angels. He was absolutely fucking shitting himself. He actually had to wait until she dumped him because he was too scared to do it himself. It's hard to tell exactly where it all started in Scandinavia, but in the 70s, several smaller biker clubs emerged influenced from rocker culture in Britain. And with the increased business of the drug trade in Europe, This was creating some very fertile soil for the outlaws to move in on. The first and largest club to this day, the Hells Angels, established their first chapter in Copenhagen in Denmark, after 4 clubs combined in either the late 70s or early 80s, since that's been a bit hard to confirm. And out of those clubs, it consisted of the Iron Skulls, the Dirty Angels, the Galloping Goose, and the Nomads. You know, Galloping Goose, of course, being a very hardcore name for a motorcycle gang. Either way, these clubs would form a new club by the name of Unionen MC, which would then apply to the Hells Angels for membership to become an official chapter.
You know, I just thought about that name, Galloping Goose. I would ask the Count, have you encountered a goose? Because I've had geese, as in multiple goose, you know, plural for goose. So multiple geese. Funny how English works. But, so yeah, I'll tell you this much. They could be mean, just really mean if they want to be. If you piss off a goose, they will come after you. And if you piss off multiple geese, they all come after you. Yeah, and they're not scared of you. They're not scared of you. At least the geese that I've dealt with in my lifetime. So if you see a goose galloping up to you and doing that trademark shh, like I know it seems funny at first and you want to laugh, but if you get like a goose charging you, they're gonna do something to you. I know they look like they can't do much, but they will get all over you, and I mean all over you. There's even some places in the north where I've been and stayed, where like there's been hotels that are close to like areas with plenty of water. And that actually I think there's like something online about this too, where there's like a sign that says caution, if you leave through this door, the goose will attack, or something like that. Because a few people actually got hurt by this one goose. So, like, man, don't underestimate anything from nature. Never do so. Galloping Goose, perfectly fine name for an MC. Just saying.
Which would eventually happen in 1980, forming the first ever European Hells Angels chapter. Now, with the formation of the new Hells Angels MC, this caused a lot of bother for the other MCs in the area. So, in response to this rising threat, they all joined together and created their own club. Bullshit MC. Yes, that actually is their name, and we've actually talked about them before in our Freetown Christiania video.
What is this, a crossover episode?
Apparently, they were formed from the older and more brutish style of MCs which most of the newer clubs look down on, in particular the newly formed Hells Angels Club. This older style of biker would be referred to as rockers due to their initial influence from British rockers, and in modern day Danish media they are still referred to as rockers. In fact, even though we're calling it the Copenhagen or Denmark Biker War, in Denmark it's called the Rocker War. Although newer MCs tried to distinguish themselves from the older rocker style. Of course, a rivalry would soon build up between the two clubs as bullshit took up shop in Freetown Christiania, taking over the cannabis trade because that place has the largest open-air weed market in all of Europe.
And of course, this is going to lead to some problems. Oh, buddy.
And for anyone who hasn't seen my video on that place, Freetown Christiania is basically an anarchist hippie commune within Copenhagen that operates without laws. Well, at least it tries to. With bullshit moving in and controlling the hash trade, the local populace in Christiania, along with the Hells Angels, were very unhappy about that because violence was on the rise. And the Hells Angels, of course, had several reasons to dislike bullshit other than the fact they took over the key distribution centre for the hash trade within Denmark. The tensions between the Christianites and bullshit would result in a few altercations, but things really kicked off when the First Biker War of Denmark started, sometimes called the Copenhagen Biker War or the Rocker War. Now, we haven't got into the actual Great Nordic Biker War yet. We have to cover the many conflicts that happened before it so you can all understand how it started. It's like you can't explain to someone how World War II started without telling them about World War I, since that directly contributed to it.
Oh, damn. So, it looks like... man, this is going to be a long one. Stupendously long one. Okay, so we're going to have to go... There must have been a lot, and I mean a lot of major, like, clashes in between these two major groups over many years for the video to be this long. And we're not even into the great giant big one yet. Like, oh shit. Here it comes.
So, before we can explain the Great Nordic Biker War, we must first explain the First Nordic Biker War, which can be referred to as the Copenhagen Biker War or the Rocker War, so people don't confuse the two. It would all start in September of 1983 at an establishment called Sopromenaden. This place was like a restaurant slash bar slash nightclub. The facts on that aren't exactly clear, but what we do know is that this was a place frequented by local biker gangs. But this establishment was on Hells Angels territory. And then one night, 3 members of Bullshit decided to go in for a drink. Were they there to cause trouble, or did they actually just want a quiet drink? We don't actually know. But it was not a very quiet night after only one of them made it out alive. And
I'm going to say what I think happened. And what I think happened was that them 3 just wanted... They had to know. They had to know. There's no way on earth they had no idea that Hells Angels would be there. There's no way. Absolutely not. They had to know it belonged to them. So, those 3 must have gotten too big for their britches. And we're like, what are they going to do, huh? And they stepped in. 3 went in. Only 1 came out. I think we can all pretty much guess what happened there.
stereotypical fashion, a bar fight broke out, with 2 Bullshit members named Soren Grabel Grander, age 20, and Flemming Halde Jensen, age 21, both losing their lives due to being attacked with knives and bottles.
And of course, they were young, dumb, and full of you-know-what. So, I was right. They were too big for their britches. Way too big for their britches. They got themselves in way over their heads, had no idea what they were walking into. They probably Um, we're probably given plenty of warnings by their seniors. And yeah, they probably ignored it and we're like, what are these guys going to do? I'm 20, 23, 24. I'm young and bulletproof. I'm 10 foot tall. And of course, the end result was reality squished two of them. Reality being them probably causing some trouble and then paying the consequences of it.
The third member, Michael Peter Enoch, actually managed to escape, though he was severely injured. These were the first deaths of the Copenhagen Biker War. Soon after the attack, the authorities investigated and discovered that the bullshit members were attacked by 4 members of the Hells Angels, though only 3 of them would be sentenced. The main suspect behind the killings, and the one that would receive the harshest sentence, was Bent Svanny Nielsen, more commonly known as Blondie, and he received 16 years for double murder. The other 2 sentences would include Henrik Kruse Jensen, aka Dirty, and Hansi Hansen, both receiving 5 and 4 years for their involvement.
So, I'm sure some people have heard of the reputation of the Hells Angels. They aren't all directly tied to that reputation, but they are all pretty hardened individuals. And a lot of them are ex-military from some stripes. So, yeah. So, all the blame can't be left on the bullshitters. But at the same time, like, they probably went in there with a head the size of, people are gonna people. That's about all I can say about it.
There was never really an explanation of what exactly happened other than it was a bar fight that went too far. But what we do know is that this was just the beginning. Most victims of the war were bullshit members, with a total of 8 members being killed, including 3 presidents, which was a massive hit to bullshit's chain of command. One of those presidents was a man named McCrellan, aka Mackerel, who allegedly was a very influential figure when it came to controlling the cannabis trade within Christiania. On the 25th of May 1984, Mackerel headed out to his car with his wife at the time, Pia. But before they could drive away, a man called Jorn Jonke Nielsen got out of his own car and approached their vehicle. He then opened fire on Mackerel through the windshield with a Sten submachine gun. Thankfully, Pia managed to duck behind the car and take cover. Mackerel had been shot a total of 16 times and obviously died after being hit in the throat, chest and back. After carrying out the attack, Jorn, or commonly nicknamed Jonke, fled the scene and he hid from the police before fleeing to France and then to Canada to avoid arrest. We will hear more about Jonke later, but immediately after this, 4 Hells Angels members named Christian Middelbo, Jens Peter Christensen, Dennis Andrew Rasmussen and Jorgen Knudsen were all arrested in association with the crime. Following the death of their president, bullshit went through several more presidents because they just kept getting murdered by the Hells Angels. The next murder wasn't a senior member of the club, but instead a junior who was known as Little Brother. Pally Blabjerg, I've no idea if that's how you pronounce it right, I'm just saying them like they sound, was delivering beer at a kiosk in Valby when a masked man named Karsten Breslov, a member of the Morticians MC who were affiliated with the Hells Angels, entered the store and shot Pally to death. This attack wouldn't go without punishment, and Karsten was sentenced to 16 years in prison, even commenting in court that he has no regrets whatsoever apart from not killing Pally's work colleague as well.
Yep. Sounds about right. Okay. I get it. Some people would hear this and they're like, oh my gosh. And for me, it's like, well, damn, this is just escalating more and more and more. Like, I'm thinking of that, what is it, Anchorman? Where he's like, damn, that escalated quickly. Okay, let's continue.
Not exactly the smartest thing to say, during your sentencing. Moving swiftly on from one murder to the next, similar to the last hit, this one was also perpetrated by another Hells Angels affiliated club known as the Black Sheep. The new president of Bullshit MC, taking over since the death of Macro, was a man named Anchor Walther Marcus, aka the Chief, who was attending a Christmas party at the Christiania pub, Nemo Land. And at this point, Christiania was still considered bullshit territory. That same night, it was described that 3 men in tracksuits came into the pub and were confronted by the chief along with 2 others who wanted to search them in, for obvious reasons. It's hard to tell exactly what went down next, but what we do know is that the chief was then gunned down by the 3 guys, along with 1 bystander being shot in the head in the crossfire. The bystander was identified as Lars Michael Larsson, who died at the age of 20. 2 out of the 3 men, which included Ole Bonnesen Nielsen and Rene Nodiskov Ludvigsen, were sentenced to 16 years for the murders, although they argued that the situation arose out of self-defence, since allegedly the chief had drawn his gun first. Although, considering that the 3 of them were knowingly on bullshit's territory and had guns on them, it's kind of obvious why they were there.
And yeah, things just go downhill from here. What's the saying? It only rolls downhill. Well, that's a fact. And it's only getting worse and worse and worse. And it's only gonna escalate from here. It's funny to me because it gives truth to the saying, violence begets more violence. But what are you supposed to do, really? What are you really supposed to do, right? Now, me, I'm a believer in self-defense. So if someone comes up and tries to take your life, you need to get them first. But at this point, it's just becoming a an eye for an eye, tit for tat the whole way. And it's only going to go up and up and up and up and up. Bub.
Not only did this shooting make things worse for Bullshit MC, but the general attitude towards bikers in Christiania and Denmark as a whole would become much worse, since an innocent bystander had now been killed. And there was now an ever-growing interest from the police. Now, another interesting sort of hit was another man by the name of Michael Nicolaj Nielsen, who was shot by a Bullshit member named Peter Espensen, sometimes called Panic Peter. This took place in the Rio Bravo restaurant, and Michael died from a single shot to the throat.
And I wonder why he was called Panic Peter. Any ideas? I've got one. Let me know what your idea as to how he got that nickname in the comments down below.
When this was followed up with the police, Panic Peter was allegedly acquitted of manslaughter, and instead he was convicted under a specific self-defense law, arguing that he shot out of fear and agitation.
Well, there's your answer.
This was further backed up due to Michael being affiliated with the Morticians MC, who were a support group of the Hells Angels who had carried out a number of hits, so they had a reputation for killing. And because of this, the courts saw Panic Peter's self-defence arguments as reasonable. Although this wouldn't be the final run-in with the law that Panic Peter would have, as his next move wouldn't only fuck himself over, but also fuck over the remaining husk of the bullshit crew. In January of 1987, a 28-year-old porter by the name of Niels Agge Albrecht was shot by Panic Peter. For what reason? We have absolutely no idea. This was apparently carried out at Bullshit's clubhouse, so it's more than likely that Niels was actually working for them. And we can speculate all day, but we have absolutely no idea why Bullshit shot one of their own. But what we do know is that the body was cut up and buried under the very same place where the last Bullshit president was killed, the Nemoland pub in Christiania. The body was encased in concrete and buried, and then a workshop was built on top to help with concealment. However, 8 months later, the body was discovered after an anonymous tip to the authorities. After the discovery of the body, this caused a massive upheaval from both the authorities and local Christianites, which led to 9 people being convicted for complicity in the killing, along with Panic Peter receiving 14 years for the murder.
You know, there seems to be a bit of a trend here where these guys are getting like 14 years, 16 years, stuff like that. They must have like really good lawyers of some kind. Or they have some kind of pool, I guess, or something like that. I'm not really sure. Because they seem to be getting off really light for murking people. Just... Okay.
And like we talked about in our Freetown Christiania video, the locals were now fed up with Bullshit's bullshit. 150 Christianites surrounded the Bullshit gang and forced them out of Christiania, meaning Bullshit had now lost their key area of influence and had completely lost the weed trade. The Bullshit gang were truly defeated at this point. With barely any members left, they soon disbanded in 1988. The final words from the Bullshit crew came from their last president, Jan Michael Linde, aka Curl, who called up the Hells Angels and said that they've sold their clubhouse and burned their vests. The war is over. So for the Hells Angels, it was very clear that the war was a decisive win, with the less organised and inexperienced Bullshit MC being completely wiped out. And let's face it, the entire conflict was pretty one-sided. Funnily enough, that very same year, one of the key figures in the Danish Hells Angels, Jonke, remember him, the guy that shot the Bullshit MC President Macro, well, after going on the run for 4 years, he finally handed himself over to the Canadian police, where he was then extradited to Denmark to be prosecuted for the murder. During this time, he even wrote a book called My Life, which detailed the killing of Macro and all of the details leading up to it. I guess it seemed like the perfect time to come back home as the war was over and the Bullshit gang was no more. Though, when he returned to Denmark, he was sentenced to 16 years for the murder. And a cool little fact for you as well, if you want to actually go and see the very gun that he used in the Macro murder, it's actually on display in the police museum in Copenhagen.
Okay. Another, what sounds to me like a light sentence. Is anyone else seeing a weird trend here? They must have some kind of pool somewhere. Or they had pulled all the money to like pay for really good lawyers or something like that. Only getting 16 years for murder. Okay. That's about all I got at this point. Okay.
Anyway, with the war over, the Hells Angels became the dominant MC in Denmark, with two supporting clubs looking to be patched over, which included the Black Sheep and the Morticians. Although only the Black Sheep would be accepted into the Hells Angels, with the Morticians being declined. This would lead to bitter ends, as in 1992, the Morticians rebranded themselves to the Undertaker's MC, now a rival gang of the Hells Angels they once supported. You can see where this is going. So to give you a picture of the situation, the Hells Angels successfully placed a foothold onto mainland Europe by taking over the biker scene in Denmark, although they had made a lot of rivals after the first biker war. Now, of course, they wanted to spread their influence to other areas of Europe, in particular the Nordic countries. With that in mind, each country with their own pre-established clubs heard about what happened in Denmark. They knew that the Hells Angels were most likely going to try and expand into their turf, so they prepared for them. In response, the Hells Angels looked to boost their own numbers. This led to the expansion of the Hells Angels throughout Scandinavia, with the next chapter to be opened in Norway, Trondheim, with the Rowdies MC being the first Norwegian Hells Angels chapter in 1992, and Sweden soon following, as the Dirty Dragons from Malmo were also patched over in 1993. The Dragons allegedly were allowed in and endorsed by the Danish Hells Angels because they apparently defeated two other local clubs for the right to be Hells Angels and wear their club colours. This expansion would also continue into Finland, although this patch over would not be as easy as the last three, since there was some local Finnish drama. Although some clubs hated the idea of joining the Hells Angels, others were rather keen on joining, to the point where they would fight each other just like in Sweden.
So basically a battle royale of MCs to see who would get the chicken dinner from the Hells Angels. Hot damn, son. Hot damn. Oh, brother. Just, oh. What did I say earlier? What did I say earlier? This is only going to escalate further. Well, them's no brakes on this truck, apparently.
So in Finland, there were two main clubs looking for membership into the Hells Angels. The Overkill MC and the Iron Hog MC. In 1992, the Overkill MC was considered a hang-around club for the Hells Angels, meaning they were on the doorstep of the initiation process. So it's basically the equivalent of saying, yeah, you guys are cool, so you can hang around with us, but you aren't full members yet. But, of course, Overkill wanted to become a fully patched Hells Angels chapter. Now, apparently the Iron Hogs weren't too happy with this, and there was a fight between them and the Overkill members, which the Hogs won, which made the Overkill members look like bitches to the Hells Angels. So, of course, they had to win their reputation back. So to win back their respect, they basically jumped the president of the Iron Hog MC at a restaurant in Järvenpää, which, to be fair, we don't know the full details of the fight, but if several guys jump one guy, does that really prove they aren't bitches?
So, yeah. I mean, yeah, I get it. Okay. You know, the common... Okay. So on one hand, you know, if you're down for like a one-on-one, I got no problems with that really. If you both wish to engage in mutual combat, cool. Ugh. It's the honorable thing. It's a manly thing. But if you're taking 3 people versus 1 and you're jumping them, I know it sounds cowardly. I know. But then again, it's the common sense thing, right? Common sense says if you got the numbers, you're going to win. Although that's not always the case, depending on the situation, training, weapons employed, experience, terrain, all that kind of stuff can come into play as well. But, yeah, like... Oh, brother. Like, you're trying not to look like absolute wimps. But you're sending 3 against 1. Not sure where the thinking was for that one.
I don't know. Bikers are weird. But anyway, the Iron Hogs soon withdrew from trying to be initiated into the Hells Angels, and the Overkill MC regained their reputation, although they weren't getting in without some sort of drawback. And this came in the form of a police raid. Only a few months after beating up the Iron Hogs president, late at night the gates of the Overkill's clubhouse were broken down by the Finnish police using an armoured personnel carrier while a Super Puma helicopter kept overwatch. As you can imagine, several members were arrested and allegedly even a dog was shot.
No, not the puppy. Give me a sec, I gotta shut the door. Okay, back to the video.
I guess not only were Finnish biker gangs getting inspiration from America, the police were as well. This incident caused some trouble within the club, and it seemed like the perfect situation to separate the dedicated members from the more cautious, as, fearful for their freedom, several members left the club. This included a few people who were involved with the beating of the Iron Hogs president, and some others who also received jail time, further putting off more members. But things were looking up for the Overkill Bikers, as they would soon become a prospect club of the Hells Angels in 1994, officially being titled MC Finland. So that was yet another club under the influence of the Hells Angels, but while they were making friends, they were making enemies as well. A well-known member of the Overkill MC named Marco Hiersma visited a party at another Hells Angels club in Sweden, working as a bartender. Not much of the details are known, but while at the party, he was beaten up, allegedly by Hells Angels members who were supposed to be his friends, resulting in him leaving the Hells Angels to go his own way. Similar to the Bad Blood split in Denmark, Marco formed a new club, or not so new club, called the Undertaker's MC. I know, this is getting confusing, and I have absolutely no clue if this club is in any way affiliated to the prior club in Denmark, but either way, this was more enemies for the Hells Angels. This brings us to the other expansion happening in Europe, as the Hells Angels weren't the only American biker gang that wanted a piece of the pie. The Bandidos also started to filter their way in, with Marseille in France being their first ever European chapter, and they soon had interest in the Nordic countries as well. So, with the remnants of the remaining Danish rockers, including rejects from the Hells Angels and the ex-Bullshit members, the Denmark Morticians renamed themselves to the Undertaker's MC and allied themselves with the Bandidos. And eventually, they would become their first chapter in Scandinavia, soon becoming the Bandidos MC Denmark in 1993. This, of course, caused a lot of tension between the two clubs since the Hells Angels had just established their foothold just for another large biker gang to stick their fingers into their pudding. Or should I say, their Danish. This was just the beginning as more clubs in the area soon followed with the idea of merging with the Bandidos. For what specific reasons we aren't sure, but what we do know is that plenty of other Scandinavian clubs weren't keen on the newcomers, so by joining with the only other large gang, this would give them more security over their local club.
Okay, it makes sense. I mean, the Hells Angels seem really powerful at this point, to the point where there were multiple clubs doing like a battle royale to join into the Hells Angels as prospects or a chapter. So yeah, it only makes sense that if people don't want, a lot of other MCs didn't want to like jump in with the Hells Angels, they would instead join the other large one to ensure what they got essentially. By, strength in numbers being like it seems like a good move, but at the same time, the larger they grow, the more antagonistic it seems to the Hells Angels. Or so I would think. Although this can get kind of confusing, because there were some that were going to be prospects, but then like swapped their positions on shit, and then some did become in some way joined up with the Hells Angels, kinda, sorta. Oh brother, it's gonna escalate even more.
Of course, the Bandidos were more than happy to take in these clubs as new chapters, since it would increase their area of influence within Europe, especially in the drug trade. More and more clubs would join the Bandidos as either they opposed the Hells Angels' ideals or due to other factors such as the Morbids based in southern Sweden. At first, they received an offer from the Hells Angels to join on the condition they merged with a rival club of theirs known as the Rebels, to which the Morbids said, "Fuck that," and instead allied with the Danish Bandidos due to their proximity. To which they became a probationary chapter in early 1994, adding to the Bandidos' sphere of influence. So to paint a proper picture, you've now got two large rival gangs accumulating chapters across the Nordic countries, slowly gaining power on both sides, which created a biker gang cold war between the Hells Angels and the Bandidos. Although the Cold War would soon escalate through their supporting clubs. It was time for the Great Nordic Biker War to begin. The inclusion of the Morbids into the Bandidos caused massive controversy, pushing the rebels to make the first move, which would initiate the Great Nordic Biker War. Only a week after the Morbids were enlisted into the Bandidos, the Rebels MC retaliated by spraying their clubhouse down with gunfire, although luckily no one was injured. But this was a clear sign of a declaration of war, followed up with another attack only a week later. This attack would be committed by the Malmo Hells Angels president, Thomas Muller, by firing from the roof of a van with a submachine gun, riddling the clubhouse with bullets again, though luckily again, no one died, but a Morbids member did lose a finger. From here on, it only gets worse as you can imagine, so prepare yourself for a very long string of attacks that bounce between both the Hells Angels and the Bandidos. The first initiation of war would really happen in early February of 1994, where several Bandidos members in Denmark got ambushed by the Hells Angels in a nightclub while they were holding a party on the rooftop. With 13 gunshots being slung around, this resulted in the first official death of the war. Joachim Bowman, a member of the Rednecks MC who were associated with the Hells Angels, died in the gunfire. fire, while 3 others were injured, which included members from both sides. This attack, of course, made the war official, as a Hells Angels associate had been killed, in their own ambush, may I add, so that was a little bit embarrassing for them.
Oh, brother. You know, all of this up to this point sounds like one big giant cluster. One big giant cluster. And they initiated their own ambush and killed one of their own guys. Bub.
But before the Hells Angels could respond, it would actually be the Bandidos that would strike this time, with a bit more of an explosive attack. This brings us to the equipment arc of the war. Now, you've probably noticed that these attacks mostly consist of shootings with some serious firepower. Now, where were the bikers getting their hands on such weapons? Well, in most Nordic countries, they have a form of mandatory military service, which can provide some ups and downs, especially for soon-to-be bikers. You can see where this is going. So, not only did half of these outlaw bikers have extensive experience with military equipment, but they also knew where most of the military weapons depots were. In the business, we call this foreshadowing.
Foreshadowing indeed. Foreshadowing indeed. Although, you would think like your regular like citizens, people who aren't involved with either side in any way, would see all this starting to go down, start arming themselves and being like, hey, look, do what you want to each other, leave the rest of us out of it. And you would imagine that if everybody else did that, then that would force the MCs to be a lot more precise, and it would also force them to strictly target each other. Because then, if they end up getting the populace involved, both MCs would be in a lot of deep shit. Okay? Because there's only so many members of all MCs combined versus, you know, the regular populace. So, if everybody else was armed and the MCs pissed the rest of everybody off, yeah, that would have been ended really fast. Really quickly. But I think the trouble is that a lot of regular people just want to be left alone. They just want to live their life, you know, and just not be involved in none of this nonsense, right? So unfortunately, that just probably wouldn't happen. Ooh. So, yeah, like, one could only hope, I guess.
So we need to talk about where these bikers got half of these weapons, if not most of them. As between 1994 to 1997, there were an estimated 36 thefts from both Danish and Swedish military installations and the homes of military personnel. They stole everything from small arms and ammunition to automatic rifles to grenades and even landmines. Like, seriously, the bikers stole a shit ton of military equipment from right under the army's nose. And that wasn't even the worst case, because in February of 1994, several Bandidos members broke into a Swedish armoury, stealing 16 Bofors shoulder-fire anti-tank launchers, along with a shit ton of other guns and ammunition. Rocket launchers. The bikers now had rocket launchers. But these numbers are only estimates, as the Danish and Swedish militaries have refrained from releasing the accurate numbers.
Now you could say it's a very explosive situation. Oh, damn. Oh, damn. The way he makes it sound, it's as if some wild animals learned how to use weapons, and then it's suddenly like hunters become the hunted or something. Like a freaking cartoon or some. Some of this sounds pretty cartoony. The bikers now had rocket launchers. Like, okay. Okay, let's keep going.
I wonder why. Maybe they're a touch embarrassed. On the other hand, the Hells Angels went for a more black market type of approach, as they sourced many of their weapons from Eastern European countries, acquiring many ex-Soviet and Yugoslavian weapons. This was the 90s, the Iron Curtain had fallen, the Soviet Union had collapsed, and basically every ex-Soviet general started selling off all kinds of Soviet military hardware so they could get the fuck out of Dodge and retire somewhere sunny. The black market completely flooded with Soviet weaponry, which even now, 30 years later, is still being used in organised crime. So, with the bloodthirsty bikers armed to the teeth with military equipment, it would only be a matter of time until more shootings happen, or in this case, rocketing. As only a day after the theft of the military equipment, the Morbids MC retaliated by attacking the Rebels clubhouse. With what, you ask? Well, a Carl Gustaf 8.4cm rocket launcher. The Morbids blew up the Rebels clubhouse with a rocket launcher. Fortunately, no one died, but it did destroy the clubhouse and seriously damage the garage and swimming pool. The violence has somewhat escalated. This brings us to some good old-fashioned biker politics. You see, as of now, the conflicts that happened in southern Sweden were between chapters that, yes, were both affiliated with the Hells Angels and Bandidos respectively, and although the attacks may have been endorsed by higher-ups in the local area, these attacks were not approved by the real big boys. Now, you're probably asking, what do you mean by the real big boys? Well, you've got to remember that these are two international biker gangs, and the Nordic countries at this time were relatively new in terms of their inclusion. Across the sea in Burgerland is where the real leaders of the Hells Angels and the Bandidos were, who the Nordic biker gangs were supposed to answer to. However, the Nordic biker gangs decided to act on their own initiative and got a little bit overzealous. Just like in countless previous scenarios where two large powers clash, they of course don't want to butt heads directly, but still want to inflict some sort of damage to the opposite side while protecting their own assets. Due to the more direct conflict in Sweden, this drove the heads of the Hells Angels to hold a meeting. So, the infamous Oakland chapter in the US, known for having key figures such as Sonny Barger, invited the president of the Malmö chapter in Sweden, Thomas Muller, to this meeting to discuss the issues that were arising in Scandinavia. Although the Hells Angels weren't keen on the expansion of the Bandidos so close to their own territories, they still technically had a non-aggression pact in place from a previous meeting with the Bandidos in Paris, known as the Paris Pact. But with that in mind, the Bandidos had also agreed that Sweden would be considered Hells Angels territory, and they encroached on it. So it seems that both sides had broken the pact, but it was clear that the Hells Angels wanted to avoid a direct war. More than likely because that would attract even more attention from the authorities towards the drug trade they had throughout their sphere of influence. Doesn't matter what type of gang it is, war is bad for business. So when the Hells Angels in the US met with the Bandidos in Texas, they basically said they couldn't control the actions of the Morbids in retaliation for the initial attacks from the Malmo chapter. Furthermore, the overall European leader of the Bandidos, Jim Tindon, actually showed open support for the probationary chapter. This, of course, caused more diplomatic issues since you've basically got the big boys from the Bandidos not giving a fuck, along with the European heads being pretty chill with their club, acting in revenge. So, even though the Hells Angels big boys weren't keen for a war, the European branches seemed more than happy to have one. Now, of course, there was some disconnect between the continents, so eventually the American branches of the clubs would soon visit Europe to prepare for the final forms of negotiations. This would initially start with a delegation from the Houston-based Bandidos travelling to meet both Hells Angels chapters in Malmo and Copenhagen, but all forms of resolution were off the table. And ultimately, the talks were a failure. So it was inevitable that the war would soon spin out of control. With things ramping up, the clubs basically threw the idea of peace straight out the window and focused on expanding. Along with this, more and more fights would break out, and not long after the attempted negotiations, the next killing would happen. In late June of 1994, the president of Barely MC, which at the time was a supporting club of the Hells Angels, shot another president by the name of Kari Korpi, who led the Clan MC. Yes, Clan with a K. Either way, the shooting was right outside a restaurant in Järvenpää, and it was clear that things were a bit less methodical and as strategic as the last war. We aren't sure exactly what went down during the shooting, but what we do know is that the perpetrator, Juha Sainen, was arrested and later sentenced to 9 years in prison for manslaughter.
They seem to be getting a lot of really ninny sentences. They must have some damn, they must be pouring buku bank into, lawyers and stuff. Or they got some kind of pull, because they're getting really ninny sentences for almost everything they're doing. 16 years, 14 years, 9 years. Bub. Just damn.
Now, some sources argue that this was an isolated incident between the two men since they had personal problems with each other and it was less to do with the overarching war. But since the clan gang was apparently affiliated with the Bandidos, it wouldn't surprise me if their personal problems were over a dispute about the war. It may not have been a strategic hit, but it definitely ramped up the war, especially happening right after the negotiations. With the war accelerating, it was clear to the other biker gangs in the surrounding areas, you're either with the Hells Angels or with the Bandidos. There is no in between. So, for safety, a lot of them picked a side to avoid being targeted by both gangs. The very same month the clan president was shot, another two clubs in Oslo, Norway moved to being hang-around clubs, and again a hang-around club is when a prospective MC starts to hang around with the MC that they want to join so they can get to know each other. The Customizers MC followed in the footsteps of the Hells Angels, and the Rabies MC started leaning towards the Bandidos.
Okay, that's a goofy one. The Rabies MC? Rabies, huh? Making animals go nuts and people that get rabies go nuts? Wait, do people even get... Yeah, I'm pretty sure people can get rabies if they're bitten by an animal that has rabies. But seriously, what kind of name is that? Rabies? Seriously? So basically, you're declaring yourself a disease. Okay.
The one thing that I've noticed about this war is that throughout it there were only a few larger confrontations, which, don't worry, we will get into, but for the most part it was little shootings here and there. The shootings would sometimes be pre-planned targeted affairs, or would usually be spur-of-the-moment happenings because the guys got into an argument in the street or at a bar. This would usually spiral out in a few more occurrences of violence, after which the dust would settle for a few months, just for it to all start back up again. For example, the next known incident after the cases in June happened between November and December at the end of 1994. It starts off with a member of the Morbids MC, who were affiliated with the Bandidos, being shot in his car in central Helsingborg, a city in southern Sweden. We are not sure if this was a planned hit or if it was a wrong place, wrong time type of thing, but either way, just 2 days later, the Hells Angels and the Bandidos had a massive fight at a nightclub, and shortly after that, a guy was murdered in the local prison of Helsingborg for apparently snitching on the Morbids. Then, to escalate the violence even further, the Bandidos had obviously been listening to the wolf tones, because 2 car bombs were discovered in the cars of 2 Rebel MC members in early December. So yeah, that doesn't really top the literal rocket launcher attacks that were used earlier, but it's clear that things were about to get a lot more explosive. So before we go into the later years of the war, I'm just going to be honest here, there were so many incidents and confrontations that if I was to cover all of them, I would be here for years. So what I'm going to do instead is just cover the more notable events of the war. So the year is now 1995, and the biker gangs decided to start the year with a shooting. The story goes that a woman who was a friend of the Bandidos had broken down in her car, so of course she called them for help. But not only did the Bandidos show up, the Hells Angels showed up too. Now, it's not clear if the Hells Angels were just passing by and just so happened to spot them, or if they got tipped off by a spy. Either way, it ended up in a shootout. Although it seems luckily no one was hurt. Speaking of, remember Marco Hiersma? Well, with his new club called the Undertakers being formed, I'm sure Marco and the Bandidos had an interest in doing a little collab. We aren't sure specifically when they merged, but in 1995 they eventually joined under the banner of the Bandidos, adding to their list of clubs. For the most part up until now, a lot of the action would happen in a single area for a long burst, in this case southern Sweden, and then a few other incidents would break out in smaller bursts in other areas. This would probably be a mixture of planned tactics and not so planned tactics. You see, the Hells Angels and the Bandidos had very different mindsets when it came to gang warfare. This was best described by a commander from the SOCA who said, and I quote, "The Hells Angels are not like the Bandidos, who are kamikaze pilots. The Hells Angels always try to measure out the pros and cons, what is good, what is bad. The Bandidos have recruited the worst of the worst, the scum. But that made them extremely strong." And yeah, that's a pretty fair way to sum things up from what we've seen so far, as the Bandidos have went to the extreme in terms of retaliation. Even at the very start of the war, they weren't afraid to, pull out a fucking anti-tank rocket launcher and blow up a clubhouse or two. So after a few more shootings, the next victim of the war would be a major one. On the 17th of July 1995, the president of the Bandidos in Sweden, a Mr. Michael Lundgren, was returning home from a visit with the Undertakers MC in Helsinki. He didn't travel alone, and he had one member with him, although while riding, the other guy's bike had broken down. So rather than stopping, Michael carried on driving towards Helsingborg. But while he was driving, a car pulled up next to him and shot him several times with what was believed to be a Carl Gustaf M45. Even though he was wearing a flak vest, one of the bullets managed to penetrate. And if the bullet didn't kill him, then the fact that he crashed and was then run over by a car certainly did. When he was eventually taken to the hospital, at first they just suspected that this was just a normal road accident, until the doctor came in and saw that this man had a bullet in his chest. You know, it's safe to say this was not your average collision. At first there were many theories as to how he was shot, with some speculating that he was shot by a sniper waiting to ambush him. But police investigators supported the idea that he was shot from a car due to the trajectory of the bullets. Sadly, to this day, the murder has never been solved, although I'm pretty certain who done it. As were the police, they just couldn't prove it. Upon further investigation, it turns out that information obtained from a local phone network indicated that Hells Angels members had been in the area around the specific route that Michael was riding on. Furthermore, a local Swedish club known as Choppers MC gained prospect status with the Hells Angels shortly after the killing. I wonder how they earned that. And the Bandidos responded to this by blowing up another 2 clubhouses and another 2 rocket attacks. Literally, a few days after the murder, one Hells Angels affiliated club in Helsinki and then Helsingborg were hit with anti-tank rockets. The first failed to explode on impact and the second one did explode, but again, luckily, there were no deaths or injuries.
There's another trend. A lot of these seem not to be fatal. But talk about an explosive reaction. This is just all so crazy. This is all so crazy. There's like such ninny like sentencing for what these guys are doing. Oh, man. Oh, brother. What a mess. It seems so absolutely chaotic. It really does. Then again, warfare can be pretty chaotic, so...
One interesting fact about the attacks is that a police informant managed to infiltrate the Bandidos and actually warned the authorities of the potential attack, but they didn't take him seriously, so they decided not to act on it. Thankfully, no one was hurt, but what's the point of having an insider if you aren't going to use his knowledge? Also, it seems that feds knowing about attacks and letting them happen anyway is actually a global thing. Now, for the most part, all of that was the key details of what happened in 1995, other than, of course, more clubs being formed. This time, not a Hells Angels or Bandidos club, but rather a club that was established by the Outlaws MC, who are another well-known American biker gang, although this would be their sole club for the time being, located in Oslo, Norway. And due to their positive outlook on the Bandidos, they also aligned themselves with them, but they would remain an independent club, with the Hells Angels sending them a little warning in the form of a few gunshots being fired at their new clubhouse. Finally, we reach 1996, which in my opinion was the most impactful year of the war because of just some of the insane shit that went down. And it seemed that the Bandidos wanted to up their explosive influence by first throwing a bomb at a Hells Angels clubhouse in Hamar in Norway, and then following it up with petrol bombing another clubhouse and a tattoo studio in Oslo. Now you're probably thinking, okay, I understand the clubhouse, but why the tattoo studio? Well, it's very common for many gang members to have legitimate businesses on the side, and of course a common job needed is a tattooist. So many biker gangs will usually have an associated tattoo parlour where they can get all of their epic tattoos like Ride or Die or Born to Ride, and you know, all those totally epic Chad and not cringe at all tattoos. Although it wasn't just the tattoo studios that were being bombed. In early February, another 2 Hells Angels associated businesses were attacked. First, a restaurant owned by a Hells Angels member, had a grenade thrown inside it, injuring 2 people, and secondly, a motorbike garage was also attacked with a grenade. Luckily, no one died in these attacks, but I'm sure they sent the message. Basically, the Bandidos solved everything with either bombing a clubhouse, throwing a few grenades, or petrol bombing a building. The Hells Angels, however, opted for a much more precise attack. The Hells Angels preferred precision hits compared to the louder and destructive option of explosives. So, on the 1st of March, they set their plan into motion by first attacking a Bandidos clubhouse in Helsinki. They managed to injure 2 members, one of whom was the Vice President, Jarkko Koko, who died from his injuries a few days later. From there, they made a big brain move on the 10th of March, commonly known as the airport attacks. Leading up to the attacks, members of both the Bandidos and the Hells Angels coincidentally visited Helsinki for different reasons. The Bandidos were in the midst of setting up a new club, while the Hells Angels were attending a tattoo convention. And it seemed that on the return flight, both groups realised that they were about to get on the same plane. So, the Hells Angels called back to their clubhouse requesting for backup once they landed, since they knew the Bandidos would be doing the same thing. Though nothing actually happened on the flight itself, since even though these guys absolutely hated each other and were at war, they all knew that starting a mass brawl inside of a tin can 30,000 feet in the air was probably a bad idea. But the real action would kick off once they landed back home. Now, the details of exactly what happened seem to be a bit skewed between sources, but I'll try to make the best sense of it. Apparently, it went something like this. Before the bikers arrived at the airport, the plane hadn't even landed yet, both backups for the Angels and the Bandidos arrived, with both sides having several cars full of people waiting to pick their own members up. However, both groups spotted each other. Around 2 or 3 Hells Angels cars drove towards the awaiting Bandidos, firing out of the windows, then surrounding them. 2 Hells Angels left the cars with 9mm submachine guns and, just like the old-timey gangster films, opened fire on the Bandidos. In one of the cars was a Bandidos president by the name of Uffe Lindeskov Larsson, and out of the 33 shots fired, Uffe received 7 of them to the head, chest and legs, ultimately dying at the scene. Big Uffe. 3 other men were injured as well, but one of the cars managed to escape the shooting by driving the wrong way down a one-way street, scraping past a bus. The Bandidos in the car got out of their vehicle and stumbled into the departure lounge, where a few of them collapsed due to blood loss. The same day of the attack, a Bandidos member by the name of Lars Harnes, rather than seeing friendly faces when entering the arrivals lobby, was met with Hells Angels member Torkel Alsaker, aka The Rat, who then proceeded to shoot Lars in the chest, though luckily Lars survived. Either bikers are the toughest people on earth, or they are really shit at killing people. There are a few questions left in the open which I just couldn't find an answer to, such as, did the travelling Bandidos enter the cars before the shooting started, or was it just the supporting cars that were shot? Or how many people were actually involved, and also, how the fuck did the Rat get a gun into the airport? I mean, I guess it was pre-9/11. Either way, the Bandidos were heavily injured and fucked up after those attacks. But this wouldn't go without some sort of retaliation and consequence for the Hells Angels. Several of their members were imprisoned for the attacks, including accomplices such as the drivers of the cars. But the local feds were the least of the Angels' worries now, since they had really kicked the hornet's nest. So, in retaliation for the airport shootings, how do you think the Bandidos responded? Please, take some time to think about it. You'll never guess. Rockets. They blew more stuff up with rockets. The Bandidos first struck the Hells Angels compound in Haslarp, Sweden with 2 rockets that absolutely wrecked the clubhouse, although similar to the previous attacks, no one was injured or killed. Only a week later, another rocket attack happened, this time at the Hells Angels Snodelev clubhouse. Again, it caused a large amount of damage and destroyed the upper floor, but with no injuries to the bikers inside. I swear to God, either the bandidos are absolutely shit at using these rocket launchers, or the Hells Angels are extremely lucky, or the clubhouses are made out of fucking Kevlar or something, because so far, all of these rocket attacks have been completely useless other than causing a bit of property damage.
Sounds like some shit from a cartoon. Like an Acme cartoon. Like, seriously. Like the like a Wile E. Coyote and the Roadrunner. Like, oh man, an explosive reaction, yes, but like, how on earth that they have been missing every single shot? Like, okay, maybe there's like an explanation for this. Maybe, okay, maybe there was some early warning, so everybody went to the back of the building, and the rockets hit the front of the building and exploded, or went through a window, hit the ceiling, blew up the ceiling, but that was about it, or something. Like, there's so many different ways that you know, explosives can fail. And I've survived quite a bit of ordnance being chucked at me in most conceivable ways. IEDs, RPGs, mortars, Russian missile systems, what's it called? There's, damn, I forget the name of the damn thing. But there's like a Russian, an older like Soviet era, like a missile system that the Taliban, Al Qaeda, and Haqqani network would use on us, like on our fobs. Yeah. I've survived all of that, and it was directly, you know, I was directly targeted by it. But yeah, a lot of the time, if you're not like very, very well trained with these types of weapon systems, it's pretty easy to screw it up. I'm sure plenty of y'all have seen like the Afghan army or Iraqi army like training videos where they like try to shoot and then just they're like something like that. Probably it's probably just sheer ineptitude. Maybe that's what it is.
This only gets more embarrassing because another supporting club called the Avengers MC, yeah, haha, great name, were attacked with another rocket, and although the rocket itself penetrated the clubhouse, it got stuck in an interior wall and didn't explode. However, it wasn't just the bandidos that would make use of explosives. On the 26th of April, Hells Angels members broke into Horserod prison north of Copenhagen. Now, you're probably thinking it would be extremely difficult to break into a prison. But this particular prison was an open type of prison, so rather than there being large walls and security, the prisoners are trusted to live with a bit more freedom to help them with their rehabilitation. Basically, imagine university dorms with a fence and a few guards around to make sure everything's all good. So in this case, it was actually rather easy for the Hells Angels members to break in. All they did was clip the lock at the perimeter fence and wander towards the cell of their intended target, 27-year-old Morten Christiansen, aka Wooden Leg. They then threw a grenade inside his cell. That's not funny. But they broke into a prison to carry out a hit by throwing a fucking grenade inside his cell. Morton was actually sleeping when they threw the grenade in, and that's a hell of a fucking alarm clock. That's not funny. This, of course, fucked him up very badly, but surprisingly, he survived the attack, albeit in critical condition. It was thought that this attack was in retaliation for the previous assaults on the clubhouse, and the weirdest thing about this attack is no arrests were made. I mean, you would think that some CCTV or guards might have seen something, but, you know, I guess this prison was very lax in terms of security. You know, where have we heard that before?
It is funny. This shit sounds like a cartoon. It's seriously what it sounds like. All they had to do was break a lock, walk in, go to a cell, pull a pin, chuck the grenade in, and walk away. And somehow, dude who's sleeping with a grenade, live in prime, chucked into his cell, survives. That sounds like some Wile E. Coyote type of shit. Like, maybe they should have thrown 2 grenades. Bub. Bub.
Barely 2 weeks later, and the Bandidos retaliate to the grenade attack with more grenades. They drove by the house of Hells Angels member Brian Jacobson in a stolen car before proceeding to throw 2 hand grenades from the car into his garden while he was fixing his fence. This injured both Brian and another Hells Angels member, but Brian had it a lot worse because he lost his leg. Sadly, with wars, all forms of casualties are involved, and as the tensions of the war increased, it spilled over and affected many civilians. One example happened not long after the grenade attacks in early May. 2 female tourists were shot when driving by the Customizers MC Clubhouse in Oslo, a Hells Angels affiliated club. Thankfully, both women survived the attack, with allegedly one even being shot in the head and still managing to pull through. This led to the arrest of 5 Customizers members and, of course, brought way more attention to the war, since not only was it affecting the gang members, but also local civilians throughout Scandinavia. There was yet another grenade attack, but this one was totally botched. Allegedly, 2 men, potentially hired by the Bandidos, attempted to throw some grenades into a clubhouse to blow it up, though they failed miserably and blew themselves up instead. You may ask, how the hell did they manage that? Well, the men were apparently drunk when they were carrying out the attack, and a theory is that they threw the grenades at the clubhouse window, but they missed and the grenades bounced back. That's not funny. The grenades bounced back towards them. Either way, both men survived, but with serious injuries. After this attempted...
That's some cartoony shit. Like, sir, like... That sounds like some kind of shit that would happen in Call of Duty, where someone tries to chuck a grenade at you and they hit the freaking door frame, or they hit like a piece of debris, or there's just like a curtain that's just a pixelated curtain that's not soft at all. They hit the curtain and it comes back to them. Like, or somebody throwing Semtex and they accidentally stick it to the ceiling and blow themselves away. Like, but they survived. Just seriously. What kind of cartoony kind of shit is like... Oh, brother. Oh, man. Okay, let's keep going.
Attack, a notable Bandidos member who we briefly discussed earlier, Marco Hiersma, was sentenced to 9 months in prison for planning the attack. This was a huge win for the Finnish authorities as they started to really crack down hard on both the Hells Angels and the Bandidos, in particular targeting the key members to reduce the leadership and general structure of the gangs. This worked very well and it slowed down the conflicts in Finland, although it didn't prevent the conflicts from arising within the prison system, as the gang members would of course still fight each other while they were in jail. With that in mind, from here most of the events would shift more into Denmark, with a few key events coming up in both Sweden and Norway. Another thing is that honestly this war could have been 10 times worse, since there's been so many opportunities for several people to be potentially killed or injured, but either some form of technical difficulty got in the way or sheer luck helped some bikers and bystanders not get killed. There were a lot of cases of bombs being planted in various areas, with either the authorities getting there in time to dispose of it properly or some form of technical issue prevented the bomb from going off. And there were so many bombing attempts, I swear to God, like these guys could rival the IRA at this point. And these bombs weren't small at all. The bikers had several ex-servicemen from the military, so there was a handful of combat engineers that could rig up bombs with several kilograms of explosives. For example, a Bandidos member by the name of Jim Werner drove around for hours before finding a bomb underneath his car, which thankfully didn't go off. It weighed around half a kilo, and we aren't sure what type of explosives were used, but I'm sure it was more than enough to blow up a car.
A kilo of explosives. Let's see, what's a kilo? A kilogram of explosives. If that went off, there'd be like nothing left of the car. There would be nothing left of that car. Doesn't matter what car it is. That car would be done. And somehow it didn't go off. This sounds like a cartoon. It seriously does.
Some sources claim that the story went a little differently and that he was discovered dead next to the bomb, but I couldn't find any evidence to back this up other than a source just saying it happened. This is just one of many more examples to come, but not all of the demolition attempts by the bikers were failures, which we will touch on later. We finally come to our next key victim in the Nordic Biker War, Jan Crow Jensen, notoriously nicknamed Face, since he would always meet people face to sort out any shit he had with them. He was acting as a bodyguard for his superior, Michael Olsen, who was a known president of various chapters and had made many enemies due to several internal disputes between the bikers. They were both members of the Bandidos, and they were in central Oslo with two other Bandidos from the Drammen chapter just west of Oslo. While in the city centre, they came across a group of Hells Angels, 4 to be exact, and we aren't sure exactly what went on, but obviously a fight started, and one of the Hells Angels members pushed over the Bandidos' bikes. Now, if you're going to annoy a biker, that's how you go about it. To them, that's like taking a shit on their grandmother's grave. The fight was quickly stopped by the local police before things could get any worse, and the Bandidos were ordered to leave the scene, so they did. They went for a little drive around the local area to cool off after the fight, and then eventually they stopped to discuss what route they should take while having some ice cream. Doesn't matter if you're in a biker gang, there's always time for ice cream. Either way, they settled on a quieter route to take and were beginning to take off, but before Jan could drive away, several shots were fired. A bullet went right through Jan's helmet and hit him in the temple, making him collapse on the road. Still alive but unconscious, Jan was brought to hospital and sadly couldn't be saved, and he died 2 hours later after being shot in the head with a semi-automatic pistol. Although the police did investigate the murder and had a suspect within the local Hells Angels chapter, He was later acquitted of murder and the case was closed in the year 2000. It was surmised that Jan wasn't the intended target and in fact it was his superior that was believed to be the actual hit due to his previous confrontations, but to this day the murder remains unsolved. Shortly after the murder, there was a drive-by shooting carried out in Oslo targeting 2 Hells Angels affiliates, but no one was harmed. And later, 2 bandidos were arrested for carrying out the drive-by shooting. Now, going back to the first war in Denmark, the one against bullshit, do you remember how one of the key presidents of bullshit was gunned down by Jonke? Well, Jonke was in prison awaiting his sentencing. And he was about to get his sentencing, but not by the court. On the 25th of July, Jonke was about to get a surprise visit as 2 unknown gunmen entered his prison armed with automatic weapons and grenades. They found Jonke's cell and attempted to kick the door in, but it was locked from the inside. In open prison, sometimes prisoners are given the keys to their own cells. Since they couldn't get inside, they fired over 20 shots into the cell, hitting Jonke in the stomach and arm. They then left a grenade at the door of his cell, which didn't cause any further damage because, well, it's a prison cell door. Miraculously, Jonke survived the attack and allegedly even had a bullet lodged in the back of his head, which can't be removed to this day due to the dangers of the surgery. So this was the second time that bikers managed to just waltz into a prison and cause chaos. But
They must have some kind of connections in the prison just to walk in, just to get in there. They must have paid off the guards or something. And would have been like, okay, hey guards, you didn't see me. Here's 20 grand. Who would turn that down? Who? Especially if you're working like, okay. The people that work in law enforcement, they don't make a lot. They really don't. And security guards of almost every stripe, they make even less. Even less than that. So, yeah, like, it's not too hard to pay people off. It's really not.
of course, this made the authorities start to move notable gang members to more secure prisons to prevent something like this from happening again. Moving on from prison break-ins to shootings, one of the most notable shootings that happened during the war took place in late September in Roskilde, just west of Copenhagen. From a football field, what was believed to be Bandidos members shot approximately 250 bullets from both rifles and automatic weapons towards a Hells Angels clubhouse, although amazingly, only one Hells Angels member was injured. Just prior to this, in the same area, a car bomb exploded outside of a clubhouse that was allegedly powerful enough to send car parts flying all over the neighbourhood, along with the windows of the clubhouse being smashed. This was very close to a residential area, and even local authorities commented, stating that it was just absolute luck that the bomb didn't kill anyone. More and more attacks against the Hells Angels would rack up as the Bandidos would use more rockets, grenades and bombs. Even in Sweden, they couldn't escape the bombings as a bomb was set off outside a Hells Angels club in Malmo, which injured 4 people and fucked up a lot of the surrounding area. Funnily enough, the Hells Angels within the club itself were absolutely fine, but this bombing caused a lot of civilians to be evacuated. It was clear that even the public were getting sick of the war at this point, since it was now not just isolated to gang members, but also affecting many civilians in the local area. So, in protest, there were apparently up to 100 people demonstrating against the Hells Angels within Malmo. This brings us to one of the most well-known attacks during the war, which took place in October of 1996. The Hells Angels were holding their annual Viking party, which was attended by over 150 people at the time of the attack. This was a mixture of Hells Angels from throughout Denmark, with potentially other members attending from the local Nordic countries. But it wasn't just Hells Angels that were attending. Various civilians from all around Copenhagen were also in attendance. Now, it's hard to tell why they were invited. Some sources speculate that this was a way to try and integrate with the local community while building a form of rapport with them, since the reputation of the bikers throughout Scandinavia had been stained due to the war. Either way, there were plenty of partygoers and things seemed to be going well until around 3 a.m. 25-year-old Niels Poulsen, who had received extensive training in the military with anti-tank equipment, prepared for an attack on the clubhouse. Using a shoulder-fired rocket launcher, he fired at the compound and managed to kill 2 people and injure another 19. Those that died were a Hells Angels prospect by the name of Louis Lindy Nielsen and a woman named Janne Krohn, a 29-year-old single mother who attended the party with no connections to the Hells Angels or any other gangs. Among the injured was a notable Hells Angels president by the name of Christian Middelbo, who, if you remember, was one of the people that assisted in the killing of bullshit President Macron during the First War. As you can imagine, this was a great travesty to not only the Hells Angels, but to the local populace, and any chance that the Hells Angels had of regaining their reputation with the local community, well, that was definitely ruined now.
And you have to imagine that the Banditos probably knew what the Hells Angels were trying to do. So they had to understand that if the Hells Angels gained the hopeful rapport and support of the local community, the Banditos would be kind of pushed out in that way. So they definitely had to sabotage it so that they could ruin the Hells Angels' reputation a lot more, and then, you know, keep themselves at least on even playing field when it came to the local populace. Ah, brother.
Of course, after the attack there was a thorough police investigation and they managed to narrow it down to Niels Poulsen being the culprit. But apparently this was due to another Bandidos member tipping off the police, which leads to even more questions. Niels fled to France shortly after the attack, but he would later be apprehended by the authorities, who confirmed it was him due to several key pieces of evidence. For starters, he had the right sort of training to use such equipment, he was affiliated with the Bandidos, and along with this he had a remaining scar from using the rocket launcher, as well as leftover DNA found on a balaclava that he dropped after the attack. With all fingers pointing towards him, he was soon given a life sentence for the attack, but the authorities' punishment wasn't enough, and the Hells Angels would soon retaliate.
Finally, someone getting an actual life sentence for what they've done. Finally.
But before we touch on to that, we need to discuss how the local authorities decided to deal with these rogue biker gangs. For starters, prior to the Viking Party attack, the local mayor actually attempted to ask the Hells Angels to leave their clubhouse because at the time they actually rented the space from the government. And of course, the Hells Angels basically responded with, "No, fuck you." But after the rocket attack, the government decided more drastic action was needed. So they passed a new law by the name of Rockerloven, or in English, the Rocker Act. This would help the police evict biker gangs from particular meeting places and to break up any large-scale meeting held by bikers that may be of concern. It's been debated whether or not this law actually helped with the biker problem to this day, but that's a discussion for another time. For the most part, the police found it very hard to crack down on gang violence throughout Scandinavia, and only in certain places such as Finland did things manage to get under control. But for now, the war still waged on, with a few minor events happening near the end of 1996. Then we begin 1997 with another shooting in early January, but this time it was one of the few that actually managed to kill someone, with Hells Angels member Kim Svensson being shot 3 times whilst driving his car with another passenger, causing him to crash into a lamppost. Again, similar to previous killings, it remains unsolved, with several suspects being from the Bandidos, of course, but no hard evidence was found to convict any of them. It's not clear why in particular Kim was killed, so for all we know it could be a spontaneous hit compared to a pre-planned one.
So I guess they're finally getting the hang of actually, like, executing their objective with lethal results. Okay. Not so cartoony anymore, is it?
Which would fit the Bandidos well. This would hit the Angels hard, as it seems Kim was a very well respected member, with hundreds of Hells Angels from both Europe and the US attending his funeral. It would seem that the Hells Angels took some inspiration from the Bandidos by attacking a prison twice in the same month. First in early February, an allegedly prominent member of the Bandidos was targeted while incarcerated within a prison located in Kogi, Denmark. And they attacked it with an RPG. They arrived outside the prison, figured out what cell their target was in, and then fired an RPG at the cell. The first attack was a failure because the rocket penetrated the wall, landed inside the cell, and then didn't explode. The prison service even commented saying that the prison officers, along with other inmates, don't feel safe. And yeah, I can see why. As for the second attack, well, that took place within Denmark again, but in another prison in Holbæk, and this time the rocket again failed to explode after managing to penetrate 2 prison walls. So it would seem that the Hells Angels are trying similar methods to the Bandidos by focusing on well-known members. The last attempted prison attack was carried out in early May with a rather unusual method. Rather than going in guns blazing or shooting rockets at the prison cells, this time the Hells Angels decided to send a bomb into the prison. But not just any bomb, a razor bomb. And no, I don't mean a bomb that was filled with razors that would burst out like shrapnel, like in Dishonored. Instead, they allegedly packed 95 grams of explosives inside an electric razor, which would detonate once it was plugged in. But thankfully for the Bandidos member, who was the intended target, the razor was intercepted by prison customs when they realised that this shaver felt a lot heavier than it should. Speaking of bombs, this brings us to the largest bomb set-off during the war. On the 4th of June, late at night, John Gerhard Berger, a member of the Screwdrivers MC, drove a Volkswagen transit van filled to the brim with between 30 to 50 kilograms of explosives, which consisted of a diesel and fertilizer mixture. He had been instructed by his superiors that if the Screwdrivers were to become a full-fledged Hells Angels chapter, they would have to blow up the Bandidos clubhouse in Drammen, Norway. So he drove the van and parked near the clubhouse and scouted out the area to make sure that there was no one nearby. To make sure that they weren't caught, he drove the van down particular roads that had no surveillance, along with not taking a mobile phone with him. But to properly disguise himself, he wore different clothes, along with a black wig. Once he got out of the van, he used a bicycle strapped to the van as a way of escaping until he could get to his pickup point. There, he would be hidden inside a box disguised as a toolbox within the car of another gang member who was the getaway driver. That all went to plan, but they had used far too much explosives. The shockwaves could be felt from 500 metres away, causing a massive amount of damage to the clubhouse and surrounding buildings. And with the explosion being so large, innocent bystanders were caught in the blast. Irene Astrid Bakevold, a 51-year-old woman from the local area, was killed in the explosion while driving past it with her husband, who survived the blast, but he was seriously injured. In total, there were 22 people injured due to the blast, and the Bandidos clubhouse was now on fire due to the explosion, although all the members inside managed to escape unscathed by running out into the street in their underwear. Out of the 3 Bandidos that escaped the flames was Michael Garcia Olsen, one of the previous Bandidos members targeted by the Hells Angels, and it was believed that he was the main target of the bombing, although that hasn't been confirmed. Now, this was a massive failure, not only for the Hells Angels, but for bikers in general. If the public didn't hate them before, they certainly would now.
And now everybody goes and gets their guns and tells them, scram. Or one could only hope that's what happened. I highly doubt that's exactly what actually happened. But damn, like... You would think having trained personnel would make everything much more effective. Apparently not. Like, I don't know what the hell is like the malfunction. And yeah, that was way too much explosive. Way too much. Brother. Just full-on chaos. Full-on chaos. And they're getting people that aren't even involved in any of this. They're causing a lot of collateral damage. A lot. Just trying to target each other. Bub.
The Screwdrivers MC were eventually granted membership into the Hells Angels, but also had 7 members being convicted for the bombing. But this wouldn't happen until several years later. In general, the war slowed down compared to the years prior to the Drammen bombing, but there were a few more attacks that happened before the war would finally be over. The last death would be of Bandidos member Bjorn Gudmundsson, who was shot outside of a cafeteria in Lessellige, Denmark. Bjorn, along with 3 other Bandidos, were leaving to get their bikes, but before they could leave, 14 shots were fired at them. The perpetrator was Van Schmidt, a well-known Hells Angels member who would later receive the patch of one of the Filthy Few, a common patch given out in biker gangs for any member that has killed for the club. The final act of war would happen with a bang as a hand grenade was thrown at a Banditos clubhouse in Dalby, Denmark, with, fortunately, no casualties. With war, eventually comes peace, and that brings us to the closing segment of the war. With the war lasting for almost 4 years, it was clear that both the bikers, local governments, and most of all, the civilians throughout Scandinavia were all just exhausted from all the violence and destruction. This brought both sides from Europe and the US together in peace talks to discuss how this war would be resolved, with negotiations first starting in the US, but it was clear that the real discussion had to happen on Danish soil. Denmark was a pivotal area for the Nordic bikers, since it was one of the largest and most involved in terms of the war. So the final talk would happen in Copenhagen, with even the local police agreeing to provide security and logistical support to the talks, which would help contribute to the talks remaining neutral, though the police themselves wouldn't actually be involved in the peace talks. That's how bad this war was. The police didn't even run in and start handcuffing everyone. They wanted these peace talks to happen, even if they had to facilitate it. That is how bad the police just wanted all of this to be over. This would lead to the heads of both sides meeting on the 25th of September 1997, which would include Bent Nielsen, aka Blondie, to represent the Hells Angels, along with Jim Tindon being there on behalf of the Bandidos. They made some agreements and arrangements with each other, and they finally agreed to peace. What agreements and arrangements did they make? We don't know. But whatever they agreed upon, it brought the fighting to an end. At least, for now. Well, they still fight each other all the time, but it's mostly now with fists and bottles and not, rocket launchers. With a total of 138 bikers being sentenced to a total of 240 years in prison, that's quite a lot for a Scandinavian country, and a total of 9 bikers being killed along with 2 civilians, shootings, grenade attacks, rocket launcher attacks, and bombings, some of which inside multiple prisons. This war truly affected Scandinavian society and would shape more conflicts to happen between various new gangs that were appearing on the scene. This whole thing sounds like Michael Bay fucking wrote it, right? But, there was literally a full-blown conflict between biker gangs armed with military hardware. But fortunately, they finally agreed to peace. In Europe. Because while the European theatre had come to an end, there were other parts of the world that were going to have their own biker wars. Some with many, many more casualties than the Great Nordic Biker War. But we can tell those stories another time. This has been a very long video, and I would like to go home now.
Bub, okay, well there we go. Count Dankula, Absolute Mad Lads, the Great Nordic Biker War. Bub. This was a long... I'll be surprised if anybody even watches this one. Because it's stupendously... It's over 2 hours. Long. Stupendously long. Then again, when you're talking about a conflict like this, it's kind of hard to snip it down into segments. Bub. Out of all the effort, though, only 9 bikers died. Out of all that effort. Bub. Oy, oy, oy. Oh, my back hurts. Anyway, well, there y'all go. But some parts of it was like listening to a cartoon drawdown. Like, Bub. Anyway, what do y'all think? Y'all let me know. All right, I'm going to try to make this short and sweet at below. So, once again, thank you to the channel members. Here, let me get the... Thank you to the channel members, Steve Hughes, the Epic, and Kriegsman. Thank y'all very much for supporting the channel. If you want to support the channel, there's a join button that's behind the subscribe button below every single video. Also in the video description is a link to join the channel. It's only $4 a month. So yeah, if you want the channel to stick around, we need to get a lot more members, y'all. We seriously do. So yeah, that being said, I'll end it like I usually do. Be good. Seriously, be good. Don't get involved with gangs. Just don't. It's not worth it. It's never worth it. Be safe. Don't compromise on safety and security no matter where you live or what you do. Just don't compromise. Your life is not worth it. And make good life for yourselves. We don't know what's going to happen in the next year, day, month, whatever. We don't know what the future holds. So make the best of it that you can right now. That being said, I'm off. I'll see you in the next one. Last Cat Badger out.